BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. Do you guys know that thing on Facebook? It's not exactly an app, it's more like a feature that asks you questions and then you can share it with people and such. They just ask ordinary questions. I look at them a lot, but I never post them on my timeline. However, one of the things that came up was, what is one accomplishment that you are proud of that no one else would find important? Something to that effect. And I began to think, and I was like, I guess I would say, I have seen every episode of the show Crime After Crime. It's also available as a podcast, but you can watch it on YouTube here. Crime After Crime with Daniel Hallen and John Lorden. I've seen every episode, and I voted in all of their polls. That would be my accomplishment that I would say is something that I am proud of that no one else would find important. That can be our little icebreaker question for the day. If you also would like to respond to that, what is something that you have done, one accomplishment that you have that you are proud of, but no one else would ever find important or relevant? Okay, icebreaker question. The reason why I'm bringing that up is I was watching Crime After Crime for February 1st, and they had a special guest, Stephanie Harlowe. Stephanie Harlowe's all over YouTube, but I haven't seen too many of her videos, maybe one here and there over the years, but I really haven't seen that many from her. And on this episode of Crime After Crime, she mentioned that she did a 6-part series on Charles Manson and the Manson family. And I was like, I gotta check that out. Curiosity got the best of me. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to explore some things about Charles Manson and the Manson family. In the past, I would say that I really didn't like responding directly to other people's channels and other people's content, but then I was like, what am I talking about? I do it all the time, especially when you encounter things like documentaries and books. We respond to people's content all the time. I don't know if we're going to make it through 6 uploads, but right now, this is going to begin the first response to one of the things put out by Stephanie Harlowe about Charles Manson, as well as drawing upon a bazillion other sources, because somebody like Charles Manson is almost what you would say about some of the famous serial killers out there. Charles Manson's a little different than a serial killer. We need to be very clear about that. But when we were dealing with people like John Wayne Gacy and Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer last year, and even the Zodiac Killer, these are people that you've heard about so much over the entire course of your life. And it was really when I was in the 4th or 5th grade, I think it was the 4th grade, but I'm not 100% sure, when somebody first told me about Charles Manson. It was one of the teachers at my elementary school, and they're talking about this guy named Charlie Manson, who really wanted to be a famous musician. He wanted a record deal. He wanted to be a rock star of sorts, but he wasn't able to achieve that. So that's why he unleashed a reign of terror upon California. That's what the teacher told me. And I want to explore Stephanie Harlowe's series to find out if there's going to be any truth to that. I don't necessarily think it's that simple. In fact, I think we all know that it is not that simple as of now. The first upload that Stephanie Harlowe did was about an hour and a half long, and these are some long uploads. So I'm quite curious how far we're going to be getting into this series. I would like to do kind of some sort of response to all 6 of them, but let's see where this thing goes. What I would say is, the first part really explores Charles Manson as a kid. And if you haven't followed her uploads yet, if you haven't seen Stephanie Harlowe's series, please keep listening. We're just talking about Charles Manson and the Manson family and a host of other issues involving childhood and development, for lack of a better term. The thing is, Charles Manson was somebody who grew up in an unstable family. He grew up in a lot of rough situations. And Stephanie Harlowe began her upload by talking about how there's even a rumor that Charles Manson would spread himself, that his mother traded him for a picture of beer. And I was like, what? A picture of beer? Well, that's crazy. A picture? She couldn't even drink it. It's not real. And I was like, oh, a pitcher of beer. That must be what she said. When you're listening to things and audio and such. But Charles Manson was conceived at a rather young age for his mother. And one of the ways that his teenage mom would actually deal with the burden of motherhood was to leave him with his grandmother. And I think that actually is somewhat of an impact. That has to be some sort of an impact on how Mom didn't want the responsibilities of being a mother, so she would leave him with his grandmother, because Stephanie Harlowe is really coming at it from the stance of he was given love as a child. His grandmother was very affectionate and very caring toward him. But at the same time, I really think that the human brain has the ability to sense that his biological mother was not giving him the proper attention and care that he needed, and that she was pushing him off onto somebody else. I really think we have some types of ingrained features in that. Not saying this as a scientist or anything, just somebody who's following along with various episodes like these. And what I would say the next thing is, his mother ended up being involved with a variety of illegal activities. His mother, Kathleen Maddox, and his uncle, Luther, were involved in a very big case of armed robbery. And I hope I'm getting this quote right. I hope I heard this quote right. Perhaps my favorite thing in the whole episode. I don't know if I should take delight in it, but Luther Maddox, Charles Manson's uncle, approached a guy and he said, "Give me all your money. I have a gun." And the guy's like, "You don't have a gun." And then he says, "No, but I have a ketchup bottle filled with salt." I hope I heard that correctly. I was like, what? Then he just proceeded to beat the man with the bottle, and they stole his money. And yes, the man was acquainted with Charlie Manson's mother, Kathleen. And then that actually sent Luther to jail for 10 years. Charles Manson's mother, Kathleen, was sent to jail for 5 years for unarmed robbery. She would only go on to serve 3 years, let out for good behavior. And there's some comments in there, though, to respond to Stephanie Harlowe's statement that he was given love as a kid. Well, Stefan Molyneux would have a field day with her, because simply saying that his mother didn't want the responsibilities of being a mom, so she would dump him off at grandma's. His mother was putting herself in illegal situations when she knew there was a possibility that she was going to jail, neglecting her child again, just always just being in and out of his life. And this is something that we see time and time again in the true crime world. It's not so much that somebody has been abandoned. I mean, single-parent households are a thing. I grew up in a single-parent household. Half of America grows up in a single-parent household thanks to the divorce rates. When one parent is removed from the equation completely, then that's not the end of the world. Because what actually happens with that is that somebody is forced to take on more adult responsibilities if one parent is removed. So I've gathered from hearing in a variety of sources, they're forced to mature more quickly. The child is forced to develop more adult-like behaviors and mature more quickly. If the parent is coming in and out of their life, we're not even talking about his father, he was never in the picture. But like the fact that Charles Manson's mother just coming in and out of his life at periodic times, and even going to jail, that really goes to show that I think that created an enormous amount of emotional instability with him, because it's just giving it in and then taking it away, and really leads to a certain chaotic nature. And overwhelmingly, we see that the relationship between parents and children affects their personality, affects their behavior, and you would really see that this would go on to influence Charles Manson and to become a deviant, antisocial personality. Remember, antisocial, we don't mean that he didn't like to talk. Antisocial as in against the social norm. There are a lot of legends about what's going on with Charles Manson, but what I heard from Stephanie Harlowe was, and she really wanted to highlight this point to insist that it is a true story, is that Charles Manson went to his first day of school, and I forget what grade it was, but the teacher really embarrassed him. The teacher decided to arrange the classroom by an order in which she thought the students were likable and valuable, and that she could benefit from them in some way. And she embarrassed Charles Manson. He came home crying, and Charles Manson's uncle called him a sissy, called him a wuss, and put him in one of his mother's dresses. And the next day forced him to go to school wearing a dress. And Stephanie Harlowe wanted to insist that that's a true story, that actually happened. And I know that Charles Manson would go on to be involved with a host of criminal activities. Not only the Manson family murders, a host of criminal activities that we will see. But at the same time, you're just like, oh my gosh, poor kid. You know, you get humiliated at school, then you just get humiliated by your family, so then you get humiliated at school again. I don't know about you guys, but I had a lot of bad experiences with teachers around the age that they're talking about. I mentioned we had that one teacher that told us about Charles Manson. She was cool. But other people around that age, like fourth grade, fifth grade, sixth grade, even, my sister just revealed something to me last year that she had a really bad experience in the fifth grade with a particular teacher that, left her with like a lot of just a traumatic experience. I had a very similar one with the same teachers. Teachers might not be the people that shape a person's moral center the way that parents do, but I've definitely noticed that teachers can leave a lot of very negative impacts upon children. I mean, like I said, I dealt with some of that firsthand, and hearing that same thing from my sister, who was, 2 years younger than me, so she would have had that teacher 2 years after me. I don't know about you guys. I'd be very curious if anyone has any sort of experience they would like to say about how they sort of felt with their teachers growing up and how it affected their personality and such. If you'd like to drop a comment about your own personal experience, please feel free to do so. But Charles Manson is someone who would really go on to learn lots of things. What Stephanie really likes to tell us is that he wasn't very literate. Even in his, adult life, he was not very strong when it came to reading. What he was good at doing was listening and learning information. He would be able to learn what people were telling about him, very audio-centered learner. And there are three major influences that they want to talk about. One of them is Dale Carnegie and a book on persuasion, the tactics that he had written. Another one is L. Ron Hubbard. And the third one was just like a science fiction book that I hadn't even heard of. It's like, it's somewhat famous, but I hadn't even heard of it. But the thing is, though, you look at people like L. Ron Hubbard, and Scientology was a big influence on Charles Manson. I think that's somewhat downplayed in a lot of the media. And then the other one, talking about persuasion tactics. She said that this is something that he was learning in prison, and he excelled in it. Not only did he learn the stuff, he mastered it. He mastered the persuasion tactics of just getting people to like you, getting people to be drawn into you. And these were things that Charles Manson had been kind of accustomed to his entire life. When they really want to talk about how, growing up, he learned that he could use his personality to affect things in a particular way. Even as a kid, when he was problematic in class, he was still very loud. He wasn't a quiet kid that the teacher picked on. He was the loudest voice in the school, as they said. And then this would go on to really shape a lot of things, though, that you can see even into life. Just this passion for wanting to be in the spotlight and perhaps wanting to be a famous musician. What a lot of people say about Charles Manson is that he was a good singer. And I don't know, I always thought it was weird, though, when I would listen to the few songs that you can hear from Charles Manson and the whole, "Look at your game, girl." And I was like, oh, wow, I actually kind of like his music. But Stephanie Harlowe brought up some interesting points when she said, he had a pretty singing voice. That was the way she said it. No, he had a good singing voice, but he was never really that good on any of the instruments. He really claimed that he wanted to be a guitarist, but he never mastered the guitar, and he wasn't that good at actually playing, the instrumentals. So that's something that really held him back in terms of becoming a more well-developed, more professional-style musician. That's what she said. That's what she said. No, talking about, that's her assessment of the subject. I really never thought too much about Charles Manson's guitar playing. I never really gave it a second thought. But in all seriousness, you could see, though, maybe not everyone's going to be a famous rock star, and then any normal person would be like, all right, I guess it's my calling to be an accountant. Somebody like Charles Manson, who just had this very broken childhood. All of these pillars of the community that are supposed to be keeping him safe really let him down and betrayed him. And that caused a series of antisocial things to take place. And one of the reasons was Charles Manson was smaller than a lot of the other kids. And I noticed an enormous similarity between Charles Manson and Jeffrey Dahmer when they're talking about how when he would be confronted by somebody bigger than him, he would just act really weird. He would start freaking out. He would start putting his face into weird expressions. He would start flapping his arms. I mean, Jeffrey Dahmer did a lot of those similar things, except Dahmer wasn't doing it to get out of fights. He was more doing it just to put on a show for people. And I think, though, it all stems from the same thing. It's like, they wanted to make people think this kind of created, projected image about them, as opposed to anything that would embarrass or humiliate them. Or in the case of Charles Manson, deal with things that could actually embarrass him, or like, and not only embarrass him, but hurt his physical safety, because people are trying to beat him up, and then he just acts as weird as he can to get the person to stop. I was in the 9th grade once. I can comprehend that. Let's just say I can get that whole feeling. Well, people are pushing me around because I'm not the biggest kid in school. All right, well, let's see if we can do something else to get people to stop acting this way toward me. That I completely comprehend. It's just people like Dahmer and Manson would go on to take things to an extreme level, as well as just having that antisocial personality that is against the social norm, which leads to deviant behavior. And Charles Manson was in a host of legal issues. But a point about that Stephanie Harlowe brought up that I had never really heard before is she just brings up the question: nobody really knows how many kids Charles Manson had. How many children did he have? Because in his later life, he really learns to use these persuasion tactics that we talked about, as well as the things from Scientology, learning how to share ideas and manipulate people through persuasion. He uses it on women, and he uses it to attract women to him. And like the reason why we don't know how many children he had, because he was interacting with countless women all over America. And she's like, it's probably just unknown how many children he actually fathered. And that's something that I don't really hear too frequently discussed about Charles Manson. When people talk about Charles Manson, they more look at, like, some of the things that he's saying, like, you feel the blame, are you mad? You ever feel like Wooshka Bob Ross Vantage, get Franis, and, and Bear Ramage. But if you actually listen to some of that Charles Manson gibberish, he actually gives away some secrets about Google. I kid thee not. I'm kidding you a little bit, but not 100%. And a lot of people look to Charles Manson as somebody who is someone who's just very insightful and very thoughtful. And he is somebody who's talking about prison doesn't begin or end at the gate. Prison is in the mind. There's a universe in your mind and such. And a lot of people are like, wow, what an insightful guy. But somebody like Roman Polanski, the husband of Sharon Tate, was just like, he killed my wife and he killed my unborn baby. He's a terrible criminal. Charles Manson passed away, of course, in 2017, and this upload is really just to talk about some of the things in his childhood. And the big things we want to say is, he was someone who was not brain dead, maybe of a little bit above average intelligence in terms of creativity, below average intelligence when it comes to things like reading and literacy, someone who did not have a positive upbringing, very chaotic and problematic upbringing, feeling betrayed by the things in society that were meant to keep him safe, and then turning that into chaotic energy that he would use in various aspects of his life. But because of his high intellect for absorbing audio-based information, in terms of his high listening comprehension skills, he learned how to employ this into the tactics of persuasion and argumentative trickery, getting people to follow along with him. Not to mention he was a loud person who was able to project his voice out over large groups of people, and he pulled people into his web. So I think those are the big takeaways that we can look at from Charles Manson's upbringing and his childhood. Very, very simple thing, but we're going to get into a few more bolder statements about Charles Manson and look at just some more things in his life. Maybe we'll do a 6-part response, but I really don't know if that's going to happen. However, look out for a part 2 coming soon about Charles Manson and the Manson family. This was just kind of a very quick discussion about some of his some of the things that happened to him during his upbringing. But if you like this upload, you can hit the like button. If you want to subscribe, you're welcome to subscribe. But most importantly, leave some comments below so we can continue the discussions. I would love to hear any of your responses to our challenge questions or anything you would have to say about Charles Manson, as well as just the impacts that people experience in childhood, how it affects their personality and such. Please drop a comment below. Until next time.